So Melania Trump was on the air as well. She was concerned about the family separation policy. Ivanka called it a low point for her, and the president talked last night about the family separations and somewhat defended it.
What about the forced separation of children from their migrant children?
Yeah, well, that was the same as the Obama law. You know, Obama had the same thing.
It was on the books, but he didn't enforce it. You enforced it. You launched that the zero tolerance policy to deter families with children coming in.
No, but then everybody decided, and the courts don't want separation. And frankly, when you don't do separate, when you allow the parents to stay together, okay, when you allow that, then what happens is people are going to pour into our country.
So are you going to go back to that?
Well, we're looking at a lot of things. Really, what we want to do is change the immigration laws because they're a laughing stock all over the world.
Can I just ask this simple question, yes or no?
Go ahead.
Are you willing to reinstitute that policy? You said we're looking at everything. Yes
I will only,
or no?
You can't say yes or no. What I can say is this. There are consequences from coming into a country, namely our country, illegally.
So I guess that wasn't a no.
Yeah, I'm John Meacham. One of the bleaker moments of the Trump presidency, certainly historians will record it as such. The family separation policy appears to be coming in for round two. Stephen Miller is drafting a second approach, and the president,
kids still waiting.
The president is open to it.
Well, it was, I mean, it's hard to debate what is the low point. I mean, we could take the rest of the week and try to figure that out. The whole era has been a race to the bottom. And this is, to my mind, he must have some sense that the people he's talking to at these rallies, which interestingly, even Fox is not running, which I think is an interesting inflection point, possibly. He must think that they want this because there's no principle involved here, right? He doesn't think that it's a policy that works. He doesn't think that this is somehow important in some way. We're in the midst of this inherently transactional moment where the President of the United States thinks of us as an audience, not as a country. And so everything he's doing is, I think, designed to keep that audience engaged and interested in him. And
well, that's a really good point in terms of how he thinks.
The thing is, though, John Heilman, I've been saying it from the beginning, his audience that he's reaching.
Right.
It's a niche audience. Yeah. It's 33% of Americans. Yeah. There's a reason why even on Fox News, they've stopped showing his rallies. He's saying the same thing over and over again.
I'd like to invite you to speculate. Will you speculate?
Well, I don't usually like to speculate, but yes.
Let me offer you an invitation to speculate. Yeah. The president cares about nothing more than ratings. Nothing, right?
More.
So the ratings are down on his rallies to the point, as John just said, that Fox News is no longer carrying them live because they realize they're losing advertising revenue, et cetera. Right? So what is when the president hears that Fox News, his ratings are down so much that Fox News is no longer covering the rallies. What's the president's reaction to that? What do these rallies now look like going forward as the president desperately tries to get his ratings up?
Well, let's see what happens in the next rally. I don't have any firsthand knowledge of this, but Bill Shine does work at the White House now. I'm sure Bill Shine's been calling Fox News. Again, just wild speculation. I'm sure that Jared has been calling Murdoch.
Right.
And I'm sure they've been pressuring them to make sure that they put rallies on. Let's see if Fox News puts rallies on between now and then. If so, you will know that those phone calls have been made.
But does the president change his act at all?
The president would amp it up, obviously. Yeah. Because, again, for this niche, it is so important for Donald Trump to have adoration from any front. Oh, really? Well, look at Chicago.
No, I'm not kidding.
I know. I mean, look at what he did when he started talking about beating people up.
Yeah.
Whenever Donald Trump starts to feel the energy go down, and this was during the campaign, the spotlight turn away.
He's an action junkie.
He goes crazy, and he becomes more intemperate and starts talking about beating people up, and I'll pay for your legal bills if you beat them up. And so perhaps we have that to
Can I make a point about his effectiveness at these rallies? He said last night that Kavanaugh would not have been confirmed had he not attacked Christine Blasey Ford in the speech. That is not true. The Kavanaugh effect had already shown up in polling everywhere. before he spoke. He was jumping on a
He was
bandwagon.
riding the wave.
He had held back to some degree because he wasn't sure which way this was going.
Well, John, you could
politically.
tell when he went out that night that he had seen internal polling that told him this is broken. 2 days before, 3 days before, he was timid as a mouse, or as some would say, a baby. And he was saying, let's listen to both sides, and I don't know if I'm going to support Kavanaugh. Midweek, it was starting to break. We were all feeling it, talking about it. Then suddenly, he decided to attack Dr. Ford.
Yeah, he wasn't ahead of it. He didn't transform the political moment. He was riding the wave of a political moment, and he does that. That's why he increasingly has done that. And I think what's interesting about the stuff about family separation is he may be going back to something toxic and controversial in order to stir up the dust, because he also was very ginger about it. Remember, he's like, I didn't want to do this. Like the Democrats have to change things on the Hill. They did it, which is the most preposterous thing he ever said. But it was like, I really, this is not a controversy I want on my hands. And now he's like hinting, maybe I got to get my hands dirty in order to win the election.
Well.
There's a lot of evidence, just to say that immigration is by far the most galvanizing issue in the politics of the United States and other Western countries.
And by the way,
use it to his benefit to sow doubt and divide.
By the way, we've talked about John McCain time and time again for good reason. So much to admire about Senator McCain and his memory, but it is important to remember before his last contested primary, what did he say in his 30-second spot? Build that dang wall.
Build the dang fence, right?
Or build the dang fence or something like that. So as you get closer to election time, perhaps he thinks this gins up the base. Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.